If you're like most of us, you've seen video meetings go from a temporary measure to become part of the new normal. Love them or leave them, Zoom, Teams, Skype, and other apps are here to stay. So smart leaders are adapting and conquering what is really just one more step in an overall migration to all things digital. How do we bridge what is a clear divide between in-person and online? Where can we improve the way we communicate information and ideas? What can we do to win the day in this strange new virtual environment? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. If you're looking to make a better impression in online meetings or take your virtual meetings to the next level, then the man to see is Eduardo Placer. Eduardo is the CEO and founder of Fearless Communicators, whose clients include HBO, Google, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Yale University, the Juilliard School, and the Wharton School of Business, as well as a list of A-lister private clients that are too many to mention here. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop show-stopping collections that will perform on the selling floor and online, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. Spin Expo provides a well-edited selection of top-quality products that are filled with creativity, as well as trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. I'm pleased to share that A Seat at the Table podcast now has its own website. You can find a list of all the previous episodes, the show notes for each episode, and other useful information there. You can check it out at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm because it's a podcast. Now let's sit down with Eduardo and learn how to make our next online meeting a high-energy, engaging event. Thank you so much for taking the time to join this podcast. I know that you're doing so many different things right now, so we're very excited to have you on the show. I think that when you're looking at presenting yourself online, in many different scenarios that we are nowadays, because the pandemic has pushed us into that, but likely from what I'm hearing from many different companies that I'm speaking with and senior executives are saying, we're not going to be doing certainly as much travel as we used to be doing. We've learned that we can operate in a digital environment because we've been forced to do so, right, for the last year. So it's been a proof of concept. So now the game changer is not going to be, do I know how to make a Zoom call? It's how do I come across more effectively in this kind of a new environment when we're used to being in the same room as people. I think that there's so much you can share on that. Maybe we can start with, what do you see as the key things that people get wrong when they're trying to communicate in this environment, in an online environment?
One of the things that's interesting, someone who runs an international public speaking coaching business, and it's been international from when we started back in 2015, I've been on Zoom for years. So Zoom was not new to me.
Right.
I've been running facilitations with private clients and global facilitations remotely with teams. And I think what happens is two things. One, there's a technological aspect of it, which I think forces people to be in response to technology as opposed to people. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is that you can see yourself. So now you're dealing with this added level of self-consciousness because you can see yourself in the screen. It's like doing all of your work staring at a mirror.
Yes.
And who wants to be looking at a mirror?
You're right.
Because when we look at a mirror, all we do is we see everything that we hate about ourselves.
So true.
So why do I look this way? Why am I fat? Why am I old? Why do I have too many hand gestures? Why did I wear this outfit today? And there are all these ways that people try to hide being seen.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that those are two main things that people have to navigate, because there is an honesty with the camera. And imagine how uncomfortable people feel like with home videos or with headshots.
Yes.
When it's like all day long, it's a headshot.
Yeah.
Literally, you're staring at yourself as a headshot and you're just like, wow.
Yeah.
So I think that adds, on top of the fact that people are dealing with extreme circumstances of where they have to do these conversations, which is in their homes oftentimes, children or animals or partners or lack of space. So you're taking calls in your bedroom because you're in a studio, right? All of a sudden people can peek in and see your life. So there are all these ways in which a door has been opened into people's lives, which feels a little personal, and it can feel traumatizing. That has
Right.
people extremely self-conscious. And the thing about self-consciousness is that we can read it on the screen, right?
Yeah, that's very true.
So I guess the first piece is how to deal with the technology. And one of the things that I tell people is that you don't speak into technology, you speak through technology to other human beings.
Right.
I'm in the East Village of New York, and you're in Hong Kong. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. And at least I'm creating the experience that we're sitting around a coffee table, and I have my coffee, and you're there, and I can have an intention to create intimacy, even though we're half a mile away. So I'm not looking at the camera or the microphone or the computer as an obstruction or as the end itself. The end is you, not the screen or not the monitor, not anything like that. So my intention is to always communicate through that technology to another human being.
I think that's very interesting. That's a very interesting point of view.
Right?
Mm,
That gets tricky. That's easier if I can see people.
yes.
It gets more challenging when people are not on screen and I can't see their faces. Or it's like a Zoom webinar or something like that, where I feel like I'm speaking into a vacuum and I'm not engaging with people, which is, I think, thinking about how we create content or deliver content. There is a way in which we've been taught to speak, which is by teachers and professors, which is very lecture-y. Doesn't work in this format.
Yeah, true.
Does not work. And I think that as we're crafting meetings, as we're crafting engagements with team members, as we're crafting things, we have to think about how to make things interactive. And if you don't have access to, if you're in a, for example, in a Zoom meeting type of situation, as opposed to, or if you're in a webinar as opposed to a meeting, then how are you activating the chat? How are you calling forth people from the beginning
Mm,
to give voice to them so that you can acknowledge that people are being heard, that their participation is encouraged and wanted and necessary? So I think that there is, in some ways, it's easier to hide on Zoom. Could you imagine if pre-pandemic people walked into a meeting with a blanket covering their head? Which is what it feels like when someone comes in with a blank screen and their
right.
name. It's like walking into a room. I don't want to be seen during the meeting, so
Right.
I'm going to cover myself in a blanket so
Yeah,
that you can't see me. Like people would think that's insanity, right?
exactly.
So there is a way in which we can also invite people to be seen in the ways that actually work for them, and that it really matters, I think, to see people's faces, and that if not, that they're engaging in the chat so that we actually feel like we're having communication, like communication exists in communion with community, not
Mm,
in a vacuum,
right.
so that we have that give and the take. And I think that intention of always being in relationship to the human being, to the humanity on the other side, I think impacts our delivery. It impacts how we show up, and I think creates a beautiful opportunity of creating, like, we wouldn't be able to do this otherwise.
Yeah, that's true.
And what a gift!
It's opened up a tremendous amount of opportunities. So really, now it's a matter of being able to utilize this as best possible.
Correct. And then the other thing regarding the staring at your headshot the entire time. One, you can, in Zoom, you can hide the self view so you don't have to see yourself. So sometimes people feel very liberated by
Right.
not having to see themselves. So that's a trick of the trade,
To
to
hide
do
the
that.
self view. Yeah,
Hide
that's
the self
interesting.
view.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I would say is I think it's important to prepare always for the event of speaking. And part of that is really connecting to your body and really connecting to your breath. So what oftentimes happens is we wake up, we walk to the computer, we get into the meeting, and that's it. But we don't really center ourselves before. Like, I just noticed you even stood up a little bit more and you're sitting like in your chair as I
Yeah.
said that, Jane. Like, I was just like, oh wait, I have a body. Not just a talking head, but I have a body. So being in relationship to the body is really powerful. Even if you're sitting in a chair, just like really connecting to your breath, really centering yourself, and really just slowing everything down before you step into the conversation. So I think that's really powerful. And then I think thinking about the frame that you're in and also thinking about the background. So some people choose to use screens, right? At this point in the process, like I think there are ways that you can situate the computer and the camera in ways that you can have a neutral screen. So for example, I have a brick wall in my East Village apartment, hashtag no
Right.
big deal, hashtag New York, hashtag living your life, hashtag character. And so if I'm facilitating a meeting or if I have a big conversation, I'll do it from there. I also know that for me, if I'm facilitating, if I'm leading something, I'm more powerful standing than I am sitting. So I create a context and I set myself up so that I can stand to deliver, because then I feel much more embodied and much more grounded. So it's understanding for yourself that maybe depending on the type of meeting or the conversation that you're having, it may work for you to sit, or it may actually work for you to stand. And having the versatility of that as a tool may be really helpful as people identify, wait a second, I feel so much more powerful when I'm standing. When I'm sitting, I feel diminutive, or I feel like I lean back, or I feel like I hunch over. So I feel like energetically I cut off a little bit. So maybe if I do stand, then I'm able to be connected more to my power and to my voice. So I think that's an interesting thing for people to track. Does it really serve me to sit, or should I stand?
That's really interesting, because I think that people just assume that you're going to be sitting in front of a computer monitor. And I don't think people have ever, myself included, I have not really thought about the fact that you actually could do this standing up.
You can absolutely do it standing up. And I have the privilege of a standing desk. That's what I invested in really fancily at the beginning of the pandemic when I moved my office into my apartment so that I could stand. And again, I teach speaking, so it's helpful for me to be able to stand.
Right.
And I do have a tall table in my dining room table is like a tall kind of bar stooly kind of table. So I can stand on it and could put my computer. Some people, what you can do is literally just stack books on top of the computer. I do
Right.
have a computer stand anyway, like it's just a little computer stand because I don't want to have my computer just flat on the table. And that computer stand stacked on some books, all of a sudden you get a little bit of elevation. So it can be a little do it yourself. It doesn't have to be super fancy. You don't have to take pictures of it and Instagram it and get followers,
Right.
around it. But I think that understanding that you have options and versatility and variety, I think is helpful. So then some conversations you take standing, some of them you take sitting, right? So now there's a little bit of repertoire that you have for yourself over the course of your day. So it's not just like the sitting. And then the other thing that I would say is setting an intention for your conversation.
That's interesting.
So depending on the conversation that I'm having, thinking about what is the difference that I want to make in this conversation, or how do I want to show up? Do I want to show up generous and empowered and loving? Do I want to show up curious, engaged, and excited? So what are the ways that I want to show up for the conversation? And allowing that to lead as opposed to, I hate the technology, or this is so annoying, or why do I have to look at myself? So if that's the energy that you're leading into the conversation, that's all about you, right?
I think that that's interesting, because I don't think that any of us have really thought about it from that point of view. I think we, myself included, you just think of it as being, oh, it's the same as when I used to go and meet people in person, but it's online. And actually, from what you're saying, it's really, you have to frame it in a very different way.
Yeah. And there's just things that are easier in person, right?
Yeah, for
That
sure.
because you can get the vibe, you can get the energy, you can get the feeling, like shaking somebody's hand. There's just a little bit more. And I'm Cuban. We touch,
Yeah.
not touching, not shaking the hand, or not. And there's information that we get, and we can't do that obviously on screen. I would say that there's another hack that I teach my clients, which is that it's important to see people's hands.
That's interesting.
That if someone's hands are not seen, there's a way in which my neuro transmitters, my brain has this instinct of not trusting someone because there's a part of you that feels that they're hiding something.
Right.
And if they're hiding something behind their hands, if they have something behind their hands are behind their back, do they have a weapon? So there's something intrinsic about us, probably from the savannah and the Serengeti, that as human beings were forming, that there's just this lack of trust if I don't see somebody's hands. And on Zoom, it's very easy, or in these little headshot boxes that we're in, that we don't see people's hands. So we just see talking heads. So creating the opportunities occasionally to allow your hands to be seen is a useful tool to bridge and create a sense of trust. So if you were to have a conversation with someone and their hands were behind their back the entire time, or you would never see their hand, you'd be like, why don't I see their hands?
I hadn't thought about that, but that's a very good point.
And then when the hands emerge, again, it creates a sense of trust between the speakers. So I think that that's another tool to, again, allow yourself to be natural, not performative, because now you're on the screen.
Yeah, I think that's also important because I think, like you're saying, a lot of people err by not being maybe effusive enough to overcome the distance and the lack of physical proximity, but then other people probably perform too much.
Yeah, they overcompensate. So it's part of finding that balance. And I think that's something for each person to determine for themselves. So I'm Cuban and I'm probably a little animated, right? No, I'm not screaming into the microphone and I'm not flailing around. I'm also aware of my gesture when I'm speaking, and I'm being intentional about it as opposed to erratic. So I think that we want to bring consciousness, not self-consciousness.
Interesting.
Which I think has to do with awareness. So bringing some awareness. And I do believe that the more we focus, or the less we focus on ourselves, and it's very easy to focus on yourself because you can see yourself in the corner,
Right.
the more you focus on the other person, then the more natural and easy it gets, which is a little... it's like the thing where you're rubbing your stomach while you're tapping your head. It's just, what does that mean? That feels a little confusing. But really, the less attention you give to yourself and the more awareness you bring to the other person, then I think the vibe is there. And then, because Maya Angelou very famously said, people don't remember what you say or do, they remember how you make the person feel. Right. So if the entire time you're self-conscious thinking about, I look weird, or I look strange, or this is bizarre, that's what you're bringing attention to.
Yes.
So that's what the person's going to experience. If your entire conversation is focused and aware instead on the other person, people love to talk about themselves, right? They're like, wow, they were so interested, they were so curious, they were so nice, this was so fascinating. Even when I facilitate, my attention and my curiosity is always on my audience. It's not on myself. Not to say that it doesn't creep in sometimes, but I have to surrender that and bring the awareness and attention back to my audience, to the people who are listening to me.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think people who have any experience whatsoever in either leading a group of people or public speaking understand that. And yet, like you're saying, when you go online, because you're seeing that mirror image of yourself, it's distracting. And so you forget about that. Whereas when you're standing, let's say at a podium or you're in a conference room or something like that, and everybody's there, you're in... I don't know why, because like you said, you can see them on the screen, but you're not making the eye contact in the same way. It's just that vibe is missing. And you're right, you do tend to be more distracted by yourself and your environment.
Yeah. And I think there are tricks where, specifically, I know on Zoom, because I use Zoom, that when you are in presentation mode, there are the people at the top that you can see.
Right, yes.
So I intend on making eye contact with the people that I'm seeing up on that screen, assuming through the transitive property that is then connecting to everybody that is there.
Yeah.
There are ways of creating eye contact. It's just not the same as actually looking at someone in the eyes.
Yeah, exactly. You're not getting the feedback in the same way. So it's if you're presenting in front of a group, you're scanning through the audience and connecting with one person here and then looking at another person and making that kind of a connection. But when
Yeah,
you're in the same room, it's a different feeling
totally.
than if you are on a Zoom call and you're wondering if they're looking back and seeing you, and if you're
Yeah,
actually making that connection.
yeah. And I think that's why having prompts, like actively engaging the audience in the ways that you can through chats, is really helpful. Having people reflect after what's one word that this conversation is generating for you right now. Just like having people every 6 to 7 minutes engage in some type of question or prompt that has them engage, I think fuels participation forward, as opposed to information dumping does not work on Zoom.
Yeah, for sure. So what you're suggesting is make it more interactive.
100% from the very beginning. In a lot of the events that I host, because I also host a lot of events, pretty early into the program, I would say within the first 5 to 10 minutes, we have people in breakout rooms. So then and we do breakout rooms of 3 to 4, so that there's a little bit, so 2 can get a little creepy because you have no idea who you're in there with. So you're just like, I have no idea who you are. And that feels really intimate. But 3 or 4 feels safe enough.
Right.
And thinking that is often useful because not everyone's an extrovert, right? So for
Yeah.
introverts, 3 or 4 is manageable. Like a group of 10 to 12 may feel really overbearing
Yeah.
and large. So it does create the space for some intimacy. And then their nervous systems start settling down because now they're creating connections, or they're feeling connected to people and interested, and you're priming for then the main conversation that you're going to be hosting in whatever format you're in. So even if you were to host a work meeting, let's say you have a team of 10 to 12 people or something like that, to have people in breakout rooms of 3, for example, at the beginning, just going around and sharing what's something that you're celebrating from the past week, that you want to center. What was your biggest accomplishment or victory? I think that has people feeling and fueling into the positive at the beginning, and creating some space like that you would have before a meeting would happen, where you would gather around the coffee and the croissants, and
Yeah.
thank God we're not eating the gluten and
Yeah,
the sugar,
exactly.
but an opportunity to have a sensible kiki and
Mm.
chit chat, and because I think sometimes we miss those informal ways that we related to each other, because now it's just all work, right? We
Right.
don't have those informal ways you can walk to your colleague's office or cubicle or shared area and let's grab a coffee, let's catch up, let's have a talk. Now it's a little more, send me the link and put the link on the calendar invite. It's missing that casualness of ways in which we could support. So creating those formal and informal ways for people to connect and continue to build bridges, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think what you're bringing up is true, that whenever you would be in an office meeting, as the meeting was getting started and before it really got underway, people would have that little chit chat with another person who was there. And
Yeah.
on a Zoom call, you wouldn't be doing that.
So thinking about having that in your virtual events, and even with colleagues, like the first 5 minutes of any call, we're just allowing people to settle. We're going to put people in the breakout rooms and have people connect and chit chat and have a little conversation before we dive into the real meat of the conversation. Because if not, it feels a little abrupt.
Yeah, it does. Getting the rhythm of how to really create that atmosphere in a Zoom meeting, or even if it's a one-on-one, right? When you're doing a
Correct.
group meeting, you have the difficulties of trying to connect with multiple people who are not in the same physical space. But when you're doing a one-on-one also, if it's not with someone really well,
Of
you
course.
want
Yeah.
to create that connection and that more of a friendly rapport, but it's tougher to do when it's on a call like that.
Correct. And I think I have a client of mine who she manages a global team. She's based in San Francisco, and the majority of her team is in Chennai, but she has people in Tokyo and people in the UK and people in New York. And she started doing all her one-on-ones over tea.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it would be like, let's go out, it's tea time during
Right.
the one-on-one. So people would bring their tea, and then she would have her tea, and they're over a Zoom, but we're still engaged in the digital way in that same ritual. So it could be coffee talk. It could be a cocktail kiki. Like you have a
Right.
glass of wine, I have a glass of wine. That I think shifts it from feeling overly formal
Mm.
to I think we are craving a little more intimacy. And again, not in the romantic way, but in the way that 2 people can form a connection and relate as human beings, specifically because we're all stressed.
Yeah, for sure.
There's economic stress, there's health stress, there's mental health stress. there's medical stress, like naming that is there. I think the opportunities that we have to engage and connect, even with our colleagues, I think is even more important, because we oftentimes spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our families.
Yeah, very true.
And you're on a screen while your spouse or children may be in the living room,
Right.
like you're there, but you're not being attentive to them. You're, being attentive to your colleagues. So I think that's yet another thing to be thinking about.
I think that's really important also. And I think that part of it, like you say, is you getting in the right headspace, so to speak, and approaching it from the point of view of I'm connecting with another person, as opposed to this being this distance, very sort of uncomfortable situation where I'm on a call with somebody and I feel like I'm not connecting with them. If you're looking at this and someone is getting on a call, it's easier if it's colleagues because you already know them. But let's say that you're having to get on a call with either a new colleague or maybe with a client or something. So there's already that sort of initial, I don't want to say tension, but a tense because you don't really know them. What might be some things that you could do, given that you're both on a screen, to break the ice a little bit?
So I'm always really curious. So I allow my curiosity to rule the day. And again, people choose to share different things via their Zoom extravaganza. But I tend, or whatever their virtual, meeting ethos is. So some people choose to use blank screens, so you can't see into their homes or you can't see things. So in that case, what I would do is I would possibly notice something about the person. So maybe it's the color of their shirt. Oh my God, I love that color. Oh my God, those earrings, they're stunning. Or that's a beautiful tie. Or you notice some type of detail that lets them know that they're being seen. For me, I never use a screen, so I carefully curate what people are seeing behind me. Behind me, there's like this painting of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's an orange wall.
Yeah, which is very nice. You have a very striking environment there.
Yes, which is very much on brand, and it's very much about me and my business. So it leads people, it gives people a gateway to learn about me.
Yes.
So I'm oftentimes looking at, I read that book, if I can see the book on the bookshelf.
Right.
Or I love that photograph, or I love that painting, or I love the color of that wall. So it's understanding and looking for details that allow the person to be seen. So that is oftentimes what I'm doing as a bridge, specifically if I don't know the person. And that oftentimes leads the way to interesting conversations. Now, you can do that virtually. You can also do that live.
Right.
So I remember I was in Tel Aviv, and I was there doing some work when an opportunity presented itself to have an interview to teach at a university there in Herzliya. And as I was walking into the office, I noticed that there were pictures on the wall. And I said, oh my God, those are gorgeous pictures. Who took them? And she said, I did. And then I said, oh my God, I was a photographer. When I started my public speaking coaching business back in 2007, I was also a photographer. Before we even settled and had a conversation about who I am as a public speaking coach and teaching public speaking at this university. So being curious about the person, their humanity, what they love, what they're passionate about, which is oftentimes on display, which is why they have it in their offices, I think that becomes an interesting hook to start building a sense of connection.
That's really interesting because you wouldn't think to do that when you're online. If you walked into somebody's office or their home, you would be inclined to mention things like objects of art that they might have around or decor or so forth, or even what they're wearing. But when you're online doing a Zoom call or a Teams meeting or so forth, you don't really think about it in that way. And I think it's interesting that you're bringing that up because it's something that everyone really can do. Unless, of course, the person has a screen, as you said.
And even with the screen, there are little things that creep out.
Right.
Like a cat.
If you have a cat, right?
Like if you have a cat or an animal moves or So again, I think part of that is just being really curious about the person. And I think leaning into that curiosity. I think asking questions and identifying, like for me, again, there's an array of backgrounds that people have, and the backgrounds say a lot about a person.
Right.
And if they don't have a background, then you can look at items of clothing that people are wearing and accessories that they're wearing. It could be a scarf, or it could be a brand of headphones that they're wearing. Ooh, that's that's a beautiful headphone. Where did you get that? Right. So anything that has the person speaking about something that's unrelated to the topic starts bridging and creating a sense of connection. Right. You'll find yourself back on track, but it's a little bit of a disruptor that has people sharing. And I think that then we're having a human conversation, not just ticking tasks off a list.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think you're right. That's something that you would take for granted in a live situation, in an office situation, in a meeting situation, and to figure out, as you're explaining, how to translate that into an online environment. It's not necessarily giant steps that you need, but the fact that you've pointed it out, people are thinking, oh yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that. No, I could do that.
And when you're facilitating, and I again facilitate programs, I always, as people are arriving and landing into the meeting, I acknowledge that I see them.
Yes.
Linda, it's so great to see you. Love that color that you're wearing. Stunning. Stan, it's great to have you back on our call. Ooh, the flowers behind you are breathtaking. So just it's allowing people to know that they're being seen.
Right.
I think also shifts it, because I think people forget that they're being seen.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that it's of a duality, because on the one hand you feel self-conscious because, like you said, you can see that mirror of yourself, but at the same time, because you are just basically facing a computer, sometimes you feel you're not seen at all.
Totally. And you're just a box with another 20 people or another 50 people or another 200 people. And you're more than a box. You're an actual person.
Right.
You're a human being. Again, I think the more we can relate to the experience as a tool for greater connection, I think it transforms the experience. There's just a lot of their headphones, their monitors, their cameras, their what do I look at? All of those are tools to create greater connection. So it's not the thing in itself. What we want is connection to human beings. And I think allowing the focus and attention to always be on the human beings, it's what's going to create the standout connection. It's going to feel different than the way most people are handling the communication.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone came at this, not everyone, but most people came at it not liking it to begin with. So
right.
people really were not wanting to do these kind of calls, were resentful of having to do it. Now we've become accepting. So the next step is to see, okay, how do we make the best of it? And I think what you're saying really is you have to humanize the experience.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is something that was a theme that we're seeing a lot in the new digital world. And not new because of the pandemic, but starting with shopping online through to so many other things that have been digitized. How do we bring a human element into it? Because people want to connect with other people. So how do we create that connection? But the Zoom meetings and the Teams meetings is something that most people are spending so much of their day doing. And not by choice, because with shopping online or other things that we do, okay, that's something you do when you want to or not. When you're doing this all the time, the ability to be able to create that humanized experience is so important.
And in Spanish, there's a term which is called tener, which is to have detail. And I think from a customer service perspective, that's always what stands out when someone has detail with a customer, when someone walks in and you call them by their name, or you remember details about their past, or you remember their kids' names or spouse or milestones, or you remember their favorite color, or specifically in retail, you walk in and you're like, there's a shoe that we got and it has your name all over it.
Right.
And I knew you were coming today, so I have the size that you're going to want, and I know you're going to love it. Or it could be the color. We just got this thing and the color is exactly your favorite color. And I knew you were coming today, so I put it aside for you to, right? So that it's like, oh, they thought of me, right? That level of care. And I'm speaking to you specifically from a retail perspective, but I think that there is a way that what I'm identifying is noticing the details creates a greater form of connection.
Right.
Again, tener detalle, to have detail, right? Because then what happens is, for example, let's say I'm having a conversation with someone and I notice that on their bookshelf they have some author
Mm.
that they really love. All of a sudden, the author comes out with a new book and it's reviewed in the New York Times or it's reviewed somewhere. You can send them the link to it
Right.
and say, "Oh, I thought of you. I know that you love this author. This book just came out. I'm sure you probably know about it, but I just really thought of you. And here's the link to the New York Times review." Or you know that there's an artist that they really love. And I just saw these note cards that are of the artist, and you can get them at cards.com or whatever. I'm making it up, but
Right. Right. Right.
the point is they know that you're listening, they know that you're seeing, they know that you care. It has that sense of detail. And that isn't just something that you do to customers, that's something that you do to your colleagues. And I think that there are ways that we can be curious to mine the details to create that sense of greater connection.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. So much gets lost in the online space in between you and your colleagues, and to consciously be aware of it, as you're saying, and try to bring that back in, whereas previously you would do that automatically. So now we have to think about doing that and make a point, be more deliberate in.
Yeah, be intentional.
Right. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, and it takes a little more effort than doing it in person, and I think that it's something that pays itself forward. Just that added level of intention.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a learning experience for everybody, but I think that because this is here to stay, the better we can get at it, the more we can make use of this kind of a tool and make it something that works for us rather than against us.
Correct. Yeah. And I love that frame.
Yeah. Eduardo, thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think that everybody who's listening to this podcast is facing this situation, if not all day, every day, certainly multiple times during the week. And the more we can learn from this and become better at it, it's just going to make life more pleasant. It's going to make us not resent having to do these calls, maybe not look forward to them, but won't make them quite as challenging. Thank you for sharing all of this. It's just been fabulous.
Thank you. And I have an invitation for your audience. If they want to see some of these principles in action, the first Thursday of every month, I host an event called the Thought Leadership Forum.
Oh, excellent.
Which is all around, it's around thought leadership. So people stepping into their own leadership and in their speaking specifically. And then there's one, we say that it's time for people to center their own thought leadership. 2, it's an opportunity for people to up-level their skills. And then 3, it's a time to intentionally network with future colleagues, collaborators, and champions. And it's a global conversation. It's the first Thursday of every month. It's from 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's an hour and a half. And I think all of these principles that you see are in action. So if people want to see how we can create intimacy in a virtual landscape and have people feel connected and present and engaged and empowered, it's a great forum to see all those principles in action. And what I can do is I can share that with you. So as people listen, they can also find the opportunity to register themselves. And it's free.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll definitely put the link in the show notes, so it'll be easy for people to get to. But what is the URL for those people who might not be accessing the show notes?
So the easiest way is to do a bit.ly. So bit.ly/fearless, capital FEARLES, then capital TLF. Okay, so it's fearless with a capital F and then capital T, capital L, capital F, and then that will send them to the registration page.
Okay.
And again, it's free. It's from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the first topic we had was around trust, how to build trust with our audience. Then we did one on vulnerability. Then the one that we have upcoming is around authenticity. So again, it's all topics that I think are really top of mind for people who are looking to stand out in this digital landscape.
Oh, excellent. Definitely worth it. And again, I thank you so much for being on the show today. It's just been wonderful. I'm never disappointed when I get to learn from you. It's really always fabulous opportunity.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here and hopefully of service to the listeners in how they can continue to stand out and transform their relationship with Zoom. or Teams or this digital landscape to create more connection with the people they want to be connecting with.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, educators, and authors who share their insights, experiences, and future vision for business. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's SPINEXPO.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, our current situation and sourcing report is now available. Find out more in the show notes. And don't forget to check out our new website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table podcast, plus lots of other useful information. You can find it at seat.fm. That's SEAT.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.